It's often been said about our Constitution that when we made it, we had in mind that everybody who'd be exercising power in South Africa would be like Mandela. That's not true. That's not true. In 1991, when I was back in South Africa after 24 years of exile, I was invited to be an honorary professor at UCT. I was professor extraordinary at UWC and just honorary professor at UCT. And in my inaugural lecture, which I gave in about 1991, the theme was perfectibility and corruptibility. And it opened with the phrase, "The beautiful people are not yet born." It was a phrase that I picked up from a Ghanaian writer who'd heard it from, a Zimbabwean writer who'd heard it from a Ghanaian writer. It was the disappointments of independence. The beautiful people are not yet born. And I followed it with a statement by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the great Kenyan writer. He loved it so much, he used it 4 times in one novel. "A rich man's fart smells sweet." Now, this is not the normal opening to an inaugural lecture, but it was really to say, we're on the verge of making a breakthrough. We're going to destroy that system of white supremacy, white domination. And we're going to have a new constitution based on the principles of non-racial democracy. That's fantastic. But every constitution is built on the tension between perfectibility and corruptibility. So the lecture was called Perfectibility and Corruptibility. You aim for perfection. You hold up the highest ideals, and you guard against corruption. You guard against corruption. I even commented that in other countries where people had fought for freedom, they'd gone on to achieve their independence, the corruption was gross. It would be gold beds, things of that kind. And South Africa, being a more advanced developing country, our corruption would be more advanced and more developed. That was what I was saying in 91. And the point was based on not a theory about constitutions, our experience, our practice. And we'd lived in countries where people had fought heroically for their liberation. And they'd gone on, many of them, to become authoritarian. In Kenya, Odinga Odinga, who'd been right at the heart of the struggle, thrown into jail by Jomo Kenyatta. The Kenyatta family, Kenyatta had been imprisoned by the British for 6 years, ended up with huge swathes of land for itself. Writers like Ngugi were thrown into jail, many were tortured. This is what we'd seen. We'd also seen problems in our own organization. We were using torture in our camps against captured enemy agents. Oliver Tambo was shocked. He called me in. We developed a code of conduct. We didn't just say, "It's terrible, these things happen, you can't make omelets without cracking eggs." We are freedom fighters. Freedom must be in our hearts. We don't do this. And the code of conduct forbade the use of torture and created a kind of Bill of Rights for a liberation movement in exile. It's one of those very special Tambo features that not well known deserve to be better known. I remember a meeting in a room not much larger than this platform in Lusaka, 88. I still had 2 arms then. And my heart is beating, boom, 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 boom. Why? I'm asked to speak to delegates at ANC conference on constitutional guidelines for a future South Africa on a Bill of Rights for democratic South Africa. The first part is easy. Now, these are people from MK, they're diplomats, they're students, they're representatives, some from the underground in South Africa, overwhelmingly black. And the first point I make is it makes us look good. We're not terrorists out to seize and destroy things. Everybody knows. The second was the Oliver Tambo answer to group rights. At that stage, the regime was pushing for whites to represent whites, blacks, Zulus, Zulus. We'd have had 3 presidents, Mandela on Monday, and de Klerk on Tuesday, and Buthelezi on Wednesday. Can you imagine? 6 months deep into negotiations. That's why we broke down, actually. And his answer was a Bill of Rights. You protect people not because they're white or black or majority or minority, you protect them because they're human beings. so obvious today, it wasn't obvious then. I'm not worried about that. The third reason I said we need a Bill of Rights against ourselves. Oh, it's so easy, this bourgeois lawyer, the word bourgeois was thrown out almost synonymous with lawyers. You wouldn't say this white guy, but the implication might be there. And how would the delegates respond? And I saw a look of delight in the eyes. They knew that many things had gone wrong inside our own organization. There'd been abuse of power for sex, stabbings, stealing, a lot of difficult things. But now we were confronting them. We were dealing with them, which was so important, not just to be passive and say these things happen. And so that idea of a Bill of Rights was accepted in exile already as a kind of protection for everybody. So now I'm speaking to the students at the University of Cape Town, and I'm thinking of the protections that we're going to need. And we built them in from the beginning. Should we have a directly elected president? That would have been great for the ANC. Mandela, nobody could touch him. We'd have got a huge vote. We said no. We can't afford to have a directly elected president. You can forget about parliament. Given our traditions in this country of the colonial governor, the supreme chief of all natives, given the traditional leaders who are answerable to Pretoria, not to their own people, and given the political military struggle by its very nature was top down, it had to be. Put these three cultures together, you can forget about democracy in South Africa. We chose parliament as being the body that would elect the president and could remove the president. And you can see recently how important that power was. When it came to the electoral system, simple, direct constituency representation would have supported the ANC. In England, the Conservative Party gets 45% of the votes. They get 60% of the seats. It would have supported, I'd say us. I was then part of the ANC. But we said no, it's undemocratic, it's not fair, and we will also have constituencies representing group areas. So whites would vote for whites, and blacks for blacks, Indians, coloured. We didn't want that. And we wanted the first parliament drafting the constitution to have everybody in, the smallest party, no thresholds, no cut-off points. And so we had everybody there to be part of the constitution-making process. The idea was, and this is also not generally understood, the second elections, we would have a mixture of constituencies like the German system and PR. And that theme has been picked up by the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission report. And I think it's something that South Africa should consider today, the mixed system of representation and ending up with PR. But most important of all, we created something almost unique in the world, I think unique in the world, the Chapter 9 institutions. Institutions to protect democracy. Why? Against ourselves, against our exercise of power, whoever the us might be. And we are now about to have our 6th general elections in South Africa. I still remember people saying, you really mean that an illiterate native is going to have a vote, a rural peasant? And I still remember at one debate somebody, one of my university colleagues answering, tell me, who do you think is more worthy of the vote? A rural African peasant who wants to live in peace with his neighbors, to work hard, to look after his family, or Dr. Verroet, who's got a PhD degree, professor of sociology, very learned, who wants to keep people apart. The vote's got to be for everybody. In any event, the argument was one person, one vote, once. Democracy is not for Africa. It took us 1,000 years in Europe, 1,000 years in Europe. This is after the genocide and so on, to get democracy in Europe. How can you expect black people to be able to vote in one generation? We're about to have the 6th general elections in South Africa, free and fair general elections. And democracy is for us, and we are for democracy. And we've shown the world. We've had great leaders, we've had leaders who are not so great, we've had leaders who are part great and part not so great, but that's the nature of democracy. Then we have Why do we have free and fair elections? Partly we have an independent electoral commission protected in the Constitution. We have a judicial service commission that chooses the judges. I'm no longer a judge, so I can brag about how well our judiciary is doing. And the JSC must be good. If they chose me to be a judge, they're obviously very smart. The fact is the judiciary there to protect the core values. Against whom? Can be against the president. We struck down a very good law passed by Nelson Mandela, president, when he'd been asked by Parliament to do it through regulations. And we said, no, Parliament itself must pass the law, and he accepted it completely. We took a position on HIV/AIDS, which was well known. President Thabo Mbeki was totally against. He was denying that HIV existed, but he accepted it. President Jacob Zuma was obviously very unhappy with some of our decisions on Ricardo L, but he accepted it. This is quite remarkable in the world. I think of some other presidents in some other countries much bigger than South Africa, where presidents don't have that same attitude towards the judiciary. And it's partly because the IEC, the JSC are carefully chosen in a public way. We have the public protector, and I think something that people don't give enough value to, the Auditor General. I think the Auditor General does more to protect fundamental human rights indirectly than any of the other organs put together do directly. You control public expenditure finances, and we've had amazing Auditors General over the years. You know, our presidents might go up and down and so on, but they functioned extremely well. Public protector, people sometimes are happier with some than with others, but this is a very special South African thing that's built into the nature of our constitutional order. So finally then I come to what themes can I contribute to this conference that are of special relevance to people involved with development. And it's not simply to appreciate the Constitution, what it means, and to see how vital it is. Not only to provide a stable context in which business can go ahead, it's more than that. It's helping us to become an interactive nation. And business people are part of the nation. And business people have a role to play, not simply through pursuing profit, as I heard earlier, to develop the economy, to help with employment so that the nation can grow, but as active participants in this development of a nation. Not a nation that marches to a beat in a kind of enforced way, but a nation of free people working together to achieve common objectives. And I thought of a couple of areas that might have special relevance. The first is rethinking in terms of spatial development. Maybe I feel it so strongly because I'm in Cape Town, that projects itself as the great liberal city, and yet in many ways is the most segregated city in South Africa. I'm sad to say that. My beautiful, beautiful Cape Town. And there's a push for development, good profits to be made. Okay, it's beautiful, coastal, scenic area that traditionally has been used by people from, called non-Europeans, a little bit of coastland that they could go to over 70 years. But there's profit to be made there. It's terrible, that's a disaster. It's not only cleaning up and destroying beautiful nature that belongs to future generations, it's intensifying the spatial apartheid. And it's so hard for people to think. You're putting up a big new building. You can't just say, okay, some of the money is going to go for housing far away. All new building involving residential facilities, other facilities, should include some form of mixed development on that site, where people of color can live close to their places of work. And this shouldn't be something that you have to fight over. You should be proud of doing it. And this is not a South African phenomenon. I go to London, I see the development in King's Cross. They wanted to keep the poorer people living there. Part of the whole development program was, a requirement was, that there had to be housing for the people already living there. So gentrification doesn't drive out the long-time users of Burgkaap, wherever it might be. And this should be regarded as normal by the city councils, in terms of the regulations, built in forms of, and inventive forms, and this is the challenge to people like this, inventive forms, where it's not like you put a little cluster of RDP houses in the center of Cape Town for the sake of making a point. So that's one area that could be and must be attended to. I go to Geneva, this beautiful city and prosperous Switzerland, and I'm staying with my friends and visiting my friends, and they're so happy. The whole central part of Geneva was redeveloped, but in a way that would allow the people to stay there or to stay there at rentals, so that the wealthier in that sense are helping to cross-subsidize the living conditions for the sake of the unity and integrity of the city. So this is international best practice, and we are going in for international worst practice, that's simply allowing money, the market, which in conditions of racism perpetuates racism. Another theme would be land. I've been amused. I've been a disruptor all my life. Now suddenly the capitalists are saying how good disruption is. It's shaking things up. It's good for business. And we've all been disrupted by the issue of land. And we disrupt it because it's profound, it's deep. It's our nation, it's our history. It's called the original sin. Until South Africa grasps that nettle, we'll never be a full nation. So in a sense, we must welcome the disruption that's involved, because it's disrupting something that's intolerable and untenable, a massive, visible form of inequality that was brought about through dispossession and conquest. We've got to deal with it. And now let's see, we're not going to deal with it simply by protecting ourselves, we're under bombardment, how can we get out of this, how can we minimize? Embrace it. Come in with ideas and programs. I was thrilled to hear that there are many businesses now in the urban areas who discover they've got land they've been waiting for. They can't use it. They don't want to use it. It's there. It's vacant. One day there'll be some development there. One day is tomorrow, because housing is tomorrow. The people need it tomorrow. And businesses suddenly realize if we want a country that's meaningful, if we want future customers and future owners and future drivers of the economy, then we've got to have a decent society and a decent city. Use that land, come up with ways of using that land. Not simply what I was saying before, every kind of development must have a portion, a parcel. This should be directed especially to enabling people who've been sent to the margins of the city to come closer to the center of the city. It'll be fantastic. It'll be fantastic if business does it voluntarily and graciously with enthusiasm and trying to ensure the best public-private methods of enabling people to live in their city. In terms of land generally, the process is so important. And it's so important for everybody to participate and come up with ideas. And I believe that we've got to start rethinking the nature of our property law. We've inherited from the old Roman Dutch law. My own view is it's better than inheriting from the English law. It's clearer and simpler. But there are new needs now. And in that sense, a lot of the law is antiquated, it's blocking the forms of mixed participation in the benefits of land that our society requires now. I remember when sectional title was first mentioned, it was shocking to us. We learnt for 1,000 years, since Rome, more than 1,000 years, the owner of the land owned the structures above the land. And suddenly this is bad for capitalism. You want to sell off the portions. So 1,000 years and more of Roman law from Holland in South Africa swept aside in the interest of the new form of economic development, sectional title. So we need something equivalent to that kind of intervention, not for the purposes of more money to be made more quickly by fewer people, but for the purposes of reconciling the multiple interests. I could envisage, for example, a farm where it's not just 50-50 in terms of carving it in half, where you've had African farm workers who've been there for generations. They've buried their dead there. They have a connection with that land. They're close to the land. The white farm owners have a connection to that land, maybe generation, maybe more recently. The farm owners have knowledge and skills in terms of finance and transport and marketing and all the rest. The people who do the ploughing and so on, they know all about making it grow. They have both joint interests. If somehow some form could be given for the farm workers to get an equitable stake, progressively increasing, and the farm owner maybe staying on in the farm, that means so much, and maybe having some private exclusive area for himself or herself. But progressively, so it's not one expropriation, handing over title, but not handing over the skills, the capacities to develop properly and so on. I believe we could create new forms of evolving interests in the same piece of land, not simply usufructs and rights of way and the things that we've got at the moment, but something appropriate to the new. And I'm throwing this out to you, and I'll end with this, that maybe this grouping could sponsor research to be done in a hurry by people to come up with mechanisms that could be put to Parliament to enable some of the tensions that arise because title is too absolute one way or the other, that can allow for progressive inclusion and advancement of the people who historically have been dispossessed, but in a way that's less disruptive and less cataclysmic, if you like, to the present title holders.
Let's just have this conversation about land to start off with. When the conversation about land came up, what was your first reaction? Because the conversation was about changing the constitution, and I know that you said a number of things to the press, but at a very personal level, how did you feel about the challenge to the constitution?
I felt there were grave misinterpretations of Section 25.
Yes.
People weren't even reading it. And when you read it, you'll see that it's totally for land reform, that it gives only indirect protection to property. And the reason we were so anxious to do that was property in South Africa was theft, historically. Yeah. And at the same time, we didn't want a new government to take over and grab, dish out to their families. We'd seen what had happened in neighboring countries and elsewhere. We didn't want that. And we'd found, by and large, it's often the poor who most need property protection. It's small, but it's theirs. And then big developers come in, government comes in, powerful politicians come in, they get moved out. We were thinking of all those different factors. So Section 25 ends up by saying, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of property. It goes on to say, make it very, very clear that land can be expropriated, property can be expropriated for public purposes, and public purposes include land reform. In America, it might be difficult. There's a takings clause in their constitution. So you can expropriate land for an airport, for a school, for a hospital, but not for land reform. That's political, that's social. The courts would strike it down. We didn't want that here. We had to have land reform. Then our decision was thinking about it in advance. We want immediate restoration of property or alternative compensation, alternative land for people forcibly removed since 1910. And the 1910 date was not to say anything before that is not appropriate for redistribution, is to say anything before that is redistributed not on the basis of you were there on that land, you get restitution for that piece of land. It was to say there has to be general programs of land reform. And one of the reasons for that was we were really worried if you went back before that time, it's not only problems of proof, there were so many movements of people, especially African people, given conquest, shortage of land and so on. And our national liberation movement was set up to bring the people together. And now people say, no, this is our land. You took it from us. And it would create an ethnic connection with pieces of land historically, which would divide the nation. And then we also had problems of who should get the land. Should it be the poorest? Should it be those better off who've got the equipment to track? Difficult issues. And we left that to Parliament to decide. There are other provisions that involve upgrading of title, little pieces of paper that people had. We envisaged that would become full title. You know, it's a bit ironical. Most of us were socialists. And here we are now sticking up for title. And now many of us are saying we want the rural workers in the former tribal trust areas, we want them to have title.
Correct.
And if you speak about a communal land controlled by the chiefs who are extracting rent for that, that's against the traditional African relationship with the land which they worked. But also it's against giving people that security that you get, and it's against this thing that we always hear in capitalist environments about sweat equity, it belongs to you, you're going to work harder, family farmers and so on. That's the importance of context. In our context then, that idea of title, of security, which African people have never had since conquest, that this is mine, I can stay here, I can't be forced to move. To me, it's a very profound thing. We're fighting for that.
It's hugely profound and also quite extraordinary that it's not really just dependent on race. It isn't about just white people who took land away from black people, but it's also about our traditions and our customs being abused in order to take advantage of that in terms of security of tenure and actual title itself. So,
if I can just say, you know, when I envisage the new land law, it could also cover the relationship between the traditional leaders, who are important people in the community, symbolically in all sorts of ways, and who have such a big role that they can play if they're with the community, but without taking away the rights of the community. The community are not their subjects. They're not their subjects, not under our constitution and not under traditional African law. They're not their subjects. So the land law then would give meaningful rights to the people working their plots, wherever they might be, and at the same time recognize a certain sphere of cultural, can I say, influence and significance that the traditional leaders could have.
Sure. I just wanted to quickly ask a question, and going back to this sort of this wonderfully close relationship between perfectibility and corruptibility. I think for a lot of us, what we've seen is this concept of corruptibility actually escalating quite significantly, right until it has become almost outright plunder. Do you believe that the beautiful people are not yet born?
Yes, I believe beautiful people are born and people have beauty in them. But the capital T, capital B, capital
P.
TBP, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And prosperity doesn't necessarily bring about more beauty. On the contrary, it's often been inverted, that people who were marvelous in the struggle and heroic and decent and caring and sharing, money does something awful, something awful. I think what's beautiful for me is the way our Constitution is kicking in. And it's kicking in not only because it's been well constructed, it's kicking in because people want it. It's got popular support, huge support, huge support. And right now, dealing with the corruption, there's an impatience. Send those so-and-sos to jail. We want to see action. But the rule of law resists that. Our Constitution doesn't resist that. And for me, it's more important to do things appropriately. Get the institutions doing their job.
Yep.
Leave it to the institutions to do their job. Don't make it a party political thing. I'm in charge now, I'm going to get rid of these people, they're horrible. Then the next president comes in and gets rid of the next lot. Let the institutions take care if there's been criminality. Institutions do that. But it's not just a moral thing. You need the information. The information's coming out. You need the people in place in the institutions, step by step, step by step, step by step, and let them do the job. It takes longer, but it's more profound, and you're not only getting rascals thrown into jail, you're getting a stronger country, and a country with more confidence, and a country with that kind of vitality. You do the right thing. You're not thinking all the time, looking over your shoulder, am I surrounded by crooks? You want to get on with your science, with your promotion, with your investment, with your work. But it's difficult to do if you feel you're being undermined all the time.
So I guess talking about that, getting on with that, you talk about a nation of free people collectively working towards a common goal. Can I be a little bit provocative when I say, do we have a common goal? And if we do, what do you think is that common goal?
Maybe it's a soft way of saying if we have common goals. So that not everybody has the same goal, but they're not competing goals. And I think they're common human claims. We want a dignified life for everybody. And in the Port Elizabeth municipality case, I almost resigned from the court. It's a case where about 10, 12 black African families in PE had been evicted. They found some nice land that wasn't being used next to an upmarket area. They put up their shacks there. They lived there for 5, 6, 7 years. And then the wealthy people said, I can't, get out. They went to the council got an eviction order. And it went on appeal. Lex Mpati, who's now chairing the PIC, heard it in the Supreme Court of Appeal. Very technical grounds, he overturned the eviction. It comes to us now, and I'm asked by Arthur Chaskelson to write the judgment, and I look at the case, and I think, oh no. I've sworn without fear, favour or prejudice to uphold the law. You can't just come in our system, put up your shacks on somebody else's land. And no arbitrary deprivation. This is arbitrary deprivation. I'm a judge. I'm also Albie. And I fought in the freedom struggle in this country. I can't do it. Albie can't do it. Judge Albie has to do it. That means Judge Albie has to resign. I seriously thought I might have to resign. Fortunately, I was able to convert a personal dilemma into a constitutional tension, because everyone has the right of access to adequate housing that's in the Constitution. And what happens when two constitutional provisions clash? You can't say one is more important than the other. You've got to find a way of reconciling. Just and equitable, and I said that requires meaningful engagement through mediation, and my colleague Zach Yakub said not mediation in another case, meaningful engagement. And that's how our court creatively created a methodology But in speaking about that situation, I remember saying, our constitution is nothing if it's not Ubuntu writ large. And it's not only the dignity of those 12 families that's being assailed by evicting them. It's the dignity of everybody in our country, that we're living in a country with great wealth and still millions of our people live in conditions like that. We have to see it in those terms. And that's been the spirit of our court. That's why it was such a joy to work on that court with those values. Not smash and grab, not chaotic, not help yourself. And the poor people are individuals, they have families, they have histories, they have names, and they take part in the engagement about their future.
Well, you might know who. I think there's really some profound statements inside of that. Now, you might know who made where the quote comes from. The definition of a society's sophistication is in how it treats its most underserved, or its poor, its children, and its elderly. And I think that's really what you've been referring to. So, when one talks about a dignified life, I think we all want that for the people of South Africa, and I think everyone in this room is part and parcel a part of this process in the development world because of that. And
should I add, of course, we also want our security,
yes,
personal security. You know, I feel so sad if I go to Paris or London. I can go out walking at night, and I feel a sense of elation. And I'm sad because I can't do that in most of South Africa. And I'm well off, and I'm comfortable, and I'm protected in different ways. I think that's a common thing. We all want to feel when we go to sleep at night, we don't have to feel tension and fear. So that's another shared kind of a thing. We want fun. And I think that's where South Africans are strong. You know, I often say our biggest growth industry is stand-up comedians. And it's important. And they come from all the communities. And if you laugh at yourself, some of the tensions, they don't go away, but they don't come out in terms of conflict.